Welcome to Successful Parenting, where we, Jackie Rue and Robin Choquette, share practical skills for families to build resilience and healthy connections. As practicing professionals and parents ourselves, we hope this podcast is a resource for parents to grow, reflect, and learn more about themselves and their children. Our approach is simple, tangible, and most importantly, we lead with compassion for the integrity of the families we serve. This podcast should not be taken as medical advice and is intended for informational purposes only. We love our work and we can't wait to watch families gain confidence and open themselves up to new ways of successful parenting. Welcome back.
Hey, it's been a week. How are you doing? How's your week been?
It's been good. I have gotten a lot of people reaching out to me after our last podcast.
I have too, and it's kind of one mom said to me, it's comforting to know that she's not the only one that struggles with this in her home. And she said, what stood out to me is really just the impact that my use and my modeling has on my children. And she said, I am going to do a few things differently this week, and I'm interested to follow up with her and see what she found.
Yeah. And I know I have been more thoughtful, more aware of when I have my phone with me and when I'm out. I was at a soccer game and it was interesting. It was like at a high top at this field that we were at with my grandkids, and they were both with me. And I had asked my grandson to consider how many minutes he should be on his phone during that half. And he did a really great job with it. And then I made sure I put my phone away. Because if I was asking him to do that, I didn't need to have my phone out. And so it just made me more aware of kind of what I was doing. So how did your afternoon of no tech? Did you try it?
Oh, and this is the thing. I did try it. And this is the thing that's interesting. I know I always feel better when I have time away from tech. I feel like my brain slows down. I feel like my worries slow down. I just feel like I really get to relax and have some peace. And it was interesting. I think I had about 4 hours without, any tech and just doing some stuff outside and reading and just spending some time with my spouse. I recognize that there's so often I do things that I know don't make me feel better or don't help, but I do them because that's just what I do. And I think about my relationship with, I'll just say tech, because there's, I have laptops and I have phones and I have TVs, and, it's so often it causes me to feel more stressed. And I know even I find myself just always, engaging in some form. And so the break for me was really, really helpful.
Absolutely. Well, I have a story that a parent shared with me this week, and it made me laugh. So the parent was telling me that they had a book fair at their school, elementary school, how they have these, and they were so excited. The child's really into playing games and being on the internet. And so they said, okay, this is the prime opportunity. Gave the child money and said, okay, I want you to go pick a book out because we're going to make sure every day we have time set aside just to read, because I know you want your time to play your game, but we also want to be able to read. And the child was excited. They had their money and they, went off to school. And at the end of the day, the child comes home and was so excited, said, Mom, I got the new book. I've already started reading it. And the mother was really excited and said, well, what's the book about? And the child said, it's a mind skill book. It helps me to get better at Minecraft. So the mother was just like, ugh, I can't get away from it. Like, I can't.
But how creative of the child. And, I almost in that instance would praise the child's creativity. I mean, I think that can be purposeful in moderation, and when there's limits set, kids can learn to strategize and other things. I think when it's in, moderation, I think with all things, when we have a healthy balance and moderation. But I love that story, Robin. And I love just how the child was able to kind of follow through. And I think so often our children crave those kind of, expectations and limits.
But yeah, the mother just was like, I was trying to get him away from games and it backfired. But you're right, it really didn't. The child's reading, and that's what the mom really was asking the child to do, is do something other than that. So it was funny. Minecraft kids really get into those games. They think it's pretty funny.
Oh, 100%, 100%. And it was interesting. I had one dad follow up with me this week, and he had said they made some no time. They had recognized that when they go out to restaurants and even at meals that people people are pulling out their phones and looking at devices. And so he said, we really want to have, based on what we heard, we want to have more connection. And we recognize our children really don't have the best manners and social skills. And so they actually made it a point to go out to dinner. And I love this past Friday. And they said, there's going to be no devices, and we're going to all share a meal, and we're going to talk about our week, and we're going to talk. And there's no electronics in the car. There's no electronics, because I think so often we think, well, everyone needs to have a device in the car, and really they don't. We can play games. There's so many fun things we can do. And he said he also implemented before bed that tech was going to be left in the main living area, and kids were going to put their tech downstairs. And the teenager said, well, it's my alarm clock. I need my phone to fall asleep. And the father went out and got everyone an alarm clock. And just shifting that routine, I'm excited to follow up with him as the weeks progress and to see kind of how that impacts him.
And I think it is hard because I think kids are using it, and I think they become so accustomed to it that they don't even stop to think about it. It's a part of who we are, just like for us. You use it so quickly and so fast that you don't recognize. And I think that's one of the things that we have to stop and think, and maybe not fight them as much, but really try to come in and learn about it, embrace what it teaches us, and then really learn how to supervise. And that's one thing that I have used with my grandchildren. I don't say put it down. I say, okay, this is going on. How much time do you think you truly need on it? And they may not like it, but they usually come around to creating a time, and they're more likely to follow up. And so we have started to create some unplugged time on a regular basis, like traveling in the car. They can be on their phone for X amount of time, but then we set it as a regular time that they have to be off because it's our time for conversations, and everybody can talk and laugh as a group because we're all there, not distracted. So we've kind of created that as our unplugged time.
And I love that. And I think that you'll probably even notice that it helps just to have kind of some structure around it. Because otherwise, I think we can find ourselves just endlessly on it. And even when some of the teens I work with have it next to their bed, they will tell me they will wake up in the middle of the night to answer things and to check things. And in the morning, and if you have a child that has any sleep issues, I think it's even that much more, critical of what we found is to kind of limit the tech before bed and having it out of the bedroom. And also, I would suggest, and I've talked to many families about this, really monitoring and discussing any concerns, because the chances are the more you're on the web, the more you're going to be faced with possibly, even cyberbullying or things like that, concerns, having concerns, over children seeing things that they shouldn't see. And one thing that stands out to me that I just thought of as you were saying this, as we were talking about it this morning, I had a young girl and she was in middle school, and her mom brought her to see me in the clinic for depression and suicidal ideation. Mom had been dealing with some of her own stuff. And so she said she had been a little bit more absent in the previous months. And the preteen had been spending more and more time in her room. And she was on her phone. And one of the things mom thought is she just needed some space. And so mom kind of let it go. But what was happening is the child was becoming more and more depressed. And when I really met with them on the first session, we talked about the child spending more and more time in her room. And she had talked about she was on YouTube. And what happened is during that period, there was a certain story that kind of went rampant on YouTube. And it was a story about someone who had passed away by suicide. And all of the middle schoolers in our area were kind of sharing this YouTube video, and they were talking about it. And what happened is she had seen this YouTube video. And because when you look at a certain YouTube video or even a story on social media, it starts to pull all similar stuff, right? And so
Right.
what happened is she had started really all of her YouTube videos, or a lot of them, focused on like depression and self-harm. And the mom really had no idea, because the mom thought, as I did back a couple of years ago, YouTube is pretty harmless, right? Didn't really
Mhm.
know a ton about it. But what happened is that combination had really caused this child some depression. She felt very isolated. And so what mom really ultimately did, and I thought this was so great, she said, okay, we really need to work on connecting more, me and her, and doing things together without any tech. She removed all the tech from the child's room, and really said that the child had to be, she said, I'm concerned about how you're doing. And because of that, I want you outside of your room in the main living area when I get home until after dinner. There's no more going in your room during that time until about 8 o'clock. And Robin, as you can imagine, and I always tell parents, and we kind of laugh about it, she did not say, "Thanks, mom. This is great.
Right.
You're limiting my tech. I'm spending more time with you." Kids don't necessarily say that, but what happened is, mom really worked on this. And in the coming weeks, the girl reported less depression, more engagement in the family. And I think she ended up seeing me like 6 or 8 times because they were reporting things were going really well. I periodically followed up with them, but it doesn't always work like that. But in this example, that technology on this family had made such an impact into the child's mental health. When it did started to get limited and more engagement was brought in, she felt better.
Right, right. I think one of the things you're talking about is when they're out in those common areas, then we talk about relationships, and that's that relationship building with others and being connected with others. We think about serotonin and we think about connections and all of that. That's a huge piece of just being with others. And I think it's so important that if we can recognize that, although it's really hard and it's difficult, and I think teaching, there's going to be consequences. And I use, we've talked about this a lot. We use it in the workbook. It's your choice.
Mhm.
This is what's going to happen. If you want to do it, then, if you want your technology and we set limits and you don't appropriately use it, this is what's going to happen. It's your choice of what will happen here. I don't have the control over it. And that's what I talk to parents. I wouldn't use the language of I'm taking it away. I use the language of it's your choice what happens if you have it or you don't have it. And I think that's really important. And it all ties into what you're saying, Jackie, is that the more that we're connected, the easier it is to have those relationships. And then we talk, social emotional health starts to build and all of that gets really connected.
Absolutely. And I think, we talk about that often. And we talked a lot in the last episode about, maybe just using these few weeks to analyze or look at your own relationship as an adult, as a parent, as a family member with technology, and really having conversations with your children about kind of what they're seeing on the internet, what their experience is like,
Mm-hmm.
what they think. And I love when families do this because so often, we're unaware that maybe our child is involved in some type of like cyberbullying, or maybe we're not always aware of what's being said. My biggest concern, and I spend a lot of time on this, sometimes we have elementary and middle schoolers that have cell phones and they're not at that point in their development. A lot of times their impulse control is still, being worked on, I'll just say, and they can be very impulsive and things like that. And so I think realizing that they need really to be taught about what's appropriate to share and not share, how to handle if a child says something, that is concerning, or if things are being shared in group texts and things like that, or Snapchat. I'll go back to that a little bit because that is something where I know it got a big draw because kids felt like they could put whatever they wanted out there and it would be erased. And we later learned that that's not always the case, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so being mindful about what you're seeing, but also how to manage when all these different things may come up.
Mm-hmm. And it's so true because I think a lot of times because we don't understand, and I say we, I think parents would agree with us that we don't understand some of the stuff out there. We don't understand the ratings. We may not, for some parents, may not know where their kids are when they think about technology and what they're doing. I think having those conversations, all the things that we're talking about, opens us up to the conversations, and then you can start to look and understand and educate yourself on ratings and what's age appropriate. Also, when things happen, as you're saying, to someone when they're out there, they're more likely, I think, to start to share when that open conversation versus they're upset, they come to you and then you scream and you get all worried and concerned and pull everything from them. If we can have more conversations, I think it's much easier to navigate that along with our child.
Absolutely. And I think it is, there's a learning curve for all of us here, but I love
Yes.
how you said that, and just really learning about it, understanding it together, and being able to kind of learn together the use, and have conversations. There's
Yeah.
several documentaries that I've hosted that I've really liked around this topic. I think Screenagers was one. I think they had a 2-part series, and there's been a couple other ones, but I think it is interesting when you look at how important it is for families to have boundaries around tech within their home in terms of their child's development. And we're seeing now is, we have kids that are in college that are reporting they're not sure how to make friends and they're not sure how to advocate or go approach a teacher, maybe a teacher that is very difficult, for them. And,
Mhm.
I'm hearing this again. I just had someone say recently, I dropped the class. I really didn't like the teacher. The teacher gave me a lot of anxiety. And we talked about what that was about, but they really didn't know how to communicate to the teacher and we're talking about these are high school and college kids. So we're seeing how important it is as depression and mental health numbers are rising that our children and families have those connections.
Yeah. And when we're talking and suggesting these things, folks, if you have a child that's really engaged in it and you haven't set those limits, be prepared. It doesn't happen easily and fast. It's not something that's suddenly there. That's going to be something that you have to work towards and get to that place. So when we talk about it, we're not in this fairyland of, oh, every rainbows and cotton candy and all of that, right, Jackie?
Mhm.
We know it's
Absolutely.
going to take some time and it is going to be a journey in getting to that place. But we do promise you that when those boundaries, as Jackie is talking about, and some limits, then things do start to shift and change. And there's a lot of benefits, especially when we think about technology. There's so many benefits. And I don't hear parents talk to their children about the benefits.
Absolutely, absolutely. And I think like you've said, and I love how it is just you can be creative, right? I have I can't remember the name, but there's many different apps and things like that where you can actually do art and
Right.
you can like color and you can do music and you can I've had, kids singing and all types of things where, with anything when it's limited, you think about when we were children and even with my own children, we wouldn't have been allowed or let them just watch TV all day, right? If you had a child or we were kids, we were like watching TV from 9 to 6, our families would have said, you're done. Like this is not, and even my own kids, I wouldn't have allowed that. But yet with tech, with all these other devices, we are somewhat okay with it. And it's interesting. I think allowing like a creativity app where everyone's doing it together. When we're
Mm-hmm.
doing things together,
Together.
whether it's like you said, the learning or creativity. I think that is so key.
Yeah. And I think, identifying. So I think tech is great for learning. You're saying creativity. What's another one that you like, Jackie?
I mean, obviously, the basic one is, for socializing for different things. There's many, I have many different communities of people that I'm involved with, and we have different groups, whether a popular one, and some of the parents may know of it, is even if you like to exercise, Strava is like the big one. And it's like a Facebook for people that like to run, bike, or swim, or kayak, or whatnot. And it's funny, I was out hiking one day and I had another person out there and they were adjusting their phone and they laughed and they said, if it didn't happen on Strava, it didn't happen, and we joke and it can be a healthy way even for adults to connect. But like anything else, you just have to monitor how it impacts you. But there's always challenges on Strava. So for me, I like it because you can do these, little challenges where like I might run around the block as fast as I can. And then every other person will see it on Strava and they'll run around the block and they'll try to see if they can get faster than me. And there's a lot of fun little challenges or,
Right.
walk every day for a month, things like that can be really fun. And sometimes even families will do these challenges, let's walk every day in September for, a mile. And there is fun ways that we can do things like that.
Yeah. I do think the Pokemon, remember Pokemon Go? And it's
That's
still
still going.
popular.
It's still going.
Yeah. I mean, that was a big piece of just getting kids out of the house and moving. And I see families going and doing that together.
Absolutely, absolutely. And again, when it's balanced with other things, if you have a child that you're concerned really struggles socially, you really just creating opportunities to match it with the tech. I had one family that the child really needed to be more connected. So they signed them up for a class. It was like an art class or something like that. And they allowed the child to do the Pokemon Go on the way. They walked to the class and back and made it fun. I think as long as it's tied with engagement, and I think sometimes we confuse like engagement with I have some kids that play video games and they have friends from all over the country and they say that that's all I need, but really you'll talk to them and they have a lot of anxiety and stress, and a lot of times the anxiety and stress can come from the electronics and too much on technology. And I had shared that earlier. For me, I recognize it raises my levels of stress and anxiety when I'm on tech.
I had a family that wanted to do a tech free day. The father was really into it. He wanted Sundays to be a tech free day. And every week, this is what he did. But it seemed to me that it became more of this battle and more of a control factor within the family about a tech-free day versus what they were trying to really accomplish. So what I had suggested was, let's I think it was Sunday, next Sunday, let's say we're going to have a tech-free day, but this only to understand when it's difficult, when do we really need it? When do we not need it? It's more of a gathering of information, and the kids got to be a part of this as well. I think the kids were like high school and late middle school. So 2 kids, I think, was in that. And so we talked about using it as gathering information. And the kids went along with this because it was to also help their voice in this tech-free day. And in doing that, the family, and he said it was really interesting because the family was able to talk about it as a unit and when it was helpful and when it was a distraction, when was it able to just get away from my parents when I don't want to hear them. Right? It was a lot of different things, and they were able to break it down and have a tech-free day, but it looked differently than it did originally. So I think implementing those are really interesting, but I think trying to do it for your family, it has to be individualized, right? And I think if it's more into power and control, then you're going to probably get those battles, you're going to get the fight. But if we use it as a way to understand first, gather information, and then figure out how to have it, I think it can be really successful. And this family was able to come together. It wasn't always easy, but they were able to come together and create some limits and some things for them to be able to do it as a family to have tech free. And when they said tech free, there were a few times within the day that they had to jump on, but it was very supervised. When I mean supervised, it was very agreed upon times, and people weren't just endlessly scrolling or playing games and stuff. Have you had families to try
It
that?
looked a little bit different, like you said. So, I've had some families and they have just tried everything under the sun to set limits around video games and tech during the week. And because, a lot of times the kids will say, well, I'm doing my homework, I'm doing my homework,
Right.
and they'll multiple screen. So I've had some families say, even, homework is going to be done kind of in the main living area. There's not going to be tech in the rooms. I've had some families say there's no video games during the week, play all you want on the weekend. You really truly do need to, maybe not all you want on the weekend, but they were more lax on the weekend, but really kind of think about what works for you. But if you are finding there's a lot of power struggles, I always say don't continue to power struggle. You might have to remove it. And sometimes when we're setting new parameters, I've had many say to me, we almost just had to do a full minute to stop and have nothing for a week and then re-bring it in. And
Right.
anytime you do things different, kids are going to really react. And the more it's become kind of a problem, or I'll even say an addiction for them, the more you're going to see those kind of behaviors coming out. And so just rest assured, seek help if you can. Talk to somebody at the school or even a counselor or a pediatrician. But kids will react. And I've had several kids become very, very defiant, very, really rage or meltdown or cry when parents try to set limits on tech. And a lot of times families will say, well, my child clearly needs it. This is how they're reacting. They need this. And it really is not so much about that. It's about changing a behavior. And when you have kind of that addictive kind of tendency, which it's so easy to become addicted to tech, you are going to have that reaction. And so really kind of being thoughtful and talking about it when the child does really start to escalate, kind of cutting the conversation and say, when you can bring yourself down, we can have a conversation about it, but try to avoid talking to them when they're in a very highly emotional state, because I think it's just going to lead to more frustration. Avoid yelling and power struggling, and really go back to, this is kind of what we're going to do. And some people will even write the expectations or kind of the boundaries out and have it in a place where families can see it.
And one thing I had a family to do when we were talking about shifting and changing and taking away, we had them to really change, their structure of the day. They created a new schedule.
Mhm.
And so that new schedule actually disrupted the patterns that were there. And as they were doing it, it didn't seem as much of a battle. It was just a new plan in terms of their schedule. As they did that, then they were able to come back in and re-implement and shifting schedule again, but just changing their schedule for the day really helped with them on that.
Absolutely, absolutely. And I can't, it's if you notice too, like sometimes even tweaking things before bed, or honestly, I always encourage, if you can, take the stuff out of the room. It really, I think having kids in their rooms with the door shut, on it so much. I have some kids that go in the basement and they're in a dark space and they're playing games.
Yeah.
It's fun, but again, that can be something, maybe, if you've done really well this week, you can go down on Friday night, you can play down there in the basement for a couple hours. If you've kind of had dinner with us during the week, and whatever is works for your family. The reality is, many of us are exhausted at night and we don't want to argue with our children. And so I think that kind of becomes an obstacle for us. But I think as we do create routines, it can make things easier. But look for where your concerns are. All behaviors are reinforced. So really looking for what you're noticing, what is your child doing, on the internet? How are they using it? And kind of figuring out too, what are they getting out of that? What is the need behind the behavior? Are they needing more connection? Are they needing more affirmation? Are they needing more? What are they needing? Even more adrenaline rushes? And how can we meet those needs in other ways to balance that with technology?
Absolutely. I love that. That is so true. Instead of just reacting to, because I think we do just react to the technology, and stepping back and looking at, wait a minute, what's really going on here and how can we meet the needs of what the child is saying? And I think that happens when we start having those conversations, and we also just start to have that awareness of what is happening, and that helps us, in terms of spending more time together. If we can implement that, I think we get a better understanding of what's going on, and more conversations, and understanding the function of what's happening. And the only way I think that happens is if we're all spending time on our devices, is starting to put those down and looking at, what's the function it's serving us? What are we doing? Is it our way of tapping out? Is it our way of disengaging? I often will talk about, I think we all need times to tap out, but we all need times to restore. And conversations and connections is a restorative time. And do we look at those restorative times versus just kind of disconnecting and tapping out? It's important to think about it, dissect those two apart of
Mhm.
what am I trying to do and what's my function, right? And that's what I think or you really were pointing to, and I really like that.
Absolutely, and I think it's gonna look different for every child, and
Mhm.
I know, some parents, and I don't know if you get this, Robin, but some parents talk about concern over, what kids are doing, or teens, when they're other places, right? When they're other places, they can't always monitor that, and that's why I think it's so important to have conversations with children, even with fellow parents, with other kids, and have conversations. Same with teens and driving. Sometimes even teens are getting distracted. New drivers, we've had conversations about texting and making phone calls while driving, and things like that. I think really being mindful, again, going back to the modeling of the use, and talking about, teaching what's appropriate, and expectations. Kids aren't always going to follow because they're kids and teens. And part of that is for them experimenting and figuring out what works. But I think as we do model and teach, we really do see that it makes a difference in the child's choices.
Yeah. Jackie, as we're probably starting to wrap this conversation up today, thinking about, when is professional help needed? And that's one of the questions I often have families to ask. When do I know that this is getting out of control? One of the things I say is, first is academic functioning, social functioning. Has there been a shift and change in that? That's an indicator something is going on. What are
Yeah.
some of the things you've noticed?
I think spending more and more time in the room.
Hmm.
I have some children that they're in the room after school pretty much for the whole evening. And it's interesting that if there wasn't tech in the room, a lot of times they might not be. So really encouraging. And this was fun. I think you and I had talked about this once, but we had the one family we worked with. I don't know if you remember, but they had 4 children. Everyone in the family came up with an activity that was non-tech related that they would do without tech, or they would like to do a hobby or an interest, and they would, share it and use it during family time, as well as kind of commit to doing it separately and really develop some hobbies. And it was so helpful. But I think even that, in developing other hobbies, I love how you said early, we're not always saying take tech away, but we are adding replacement behaviors that can produce that healthy balance.
Yeah. I start also, one of the things when you talk about that, with that balance, when you see that worry, when you see that excessive just thinking and ruminating, especially around tech and gaming,
Mhm.
then I tell parents, then that would be another indicator, right? That we know something's going on.
Yeah, and I think sleep issues sometimes can go hand in hand. Is your child getting enough sleep? How's their nutrition and things like that? And also, we see a lot with children that have even a hard time going to school, or they have anxiety about school. We've seen a real big spike in this. And so again, practicing with your child, talking, to adults, talking to peers, asking questions when they need help. All of these skills will help them gain confidence, which will make them feel better about going to school. And the more these things don't happen overnight, but a lot of times when I'm speaking with families that have children that struggle even going to school or have school anxiety, tech is definitely a factor that comes up. And we talk about, it does cause feelings of isolation and things like that. And at some points, you lower confidence because we're looking at what everyone else is doing, and everyone else looks happy and they look well taken care of. I had one teen say to me, it's almost like the internet has made us feel like self-care has to be a 12-step facial every night, and we don't know how to fit all this in, and we're getting inundated with all these facials, and we need to look so great, and we just don't know how to live up to that.
So true. It is hard. Well, I know this is episode, and our previous episode has gone a little bit longer than typical, but I think it's a topic that we really need to talk about. And I know parents have a lot of questions and a lot of concerns. And so I think it's really important, if you have concerns, certainly reach out to a professional, ask and talk to them about what your concerns are.
Absolutely. And, in final, I'll say, if you have any concerns about depression, or the child has a history of, threats of suicide, or, impulsivity, or self-harm, or things like that, you definitely want to keep an eye on kind of what they're doing in the internet. If you worry they have, poor judgment, highly impulsive, things like that, really kind of cue in, have conversations with them about it, know what they're doing, participate in what they're doing, understand where they are, have it be something that is more out in the open and things like that. Because for so many of us, it's happening so fast that we're not always aware. And even kind of talking about what is appropriate tech use, and what expectations are in the home. And I love how you said earlier, Robin, as a parent, you can say, if these are our expectations, if you're not kind of following this, we're going to have a conversation if you can really handle, having this unsupervised and things like that. And so definitely things that we want to continue to talk about. And hopefully, I think this was, a lot of information, but I think this is just such an important topic right now.
Absolutely. Thank you, everyone, for joining us.
Yes, and I hope, I know we're going to continue to have a lot of conversations on this week, as this is such an important topic. Feel free to share if you find this helpful. Feel free to give us a review. We hope everyone has a great week.
Thanks, everyone. Bye, Jackie.
Bye.
Thank you for joining us, and make sure to subscribe and like us to catch our next episode, where we will take you on a journey to find new ways of successful parenting.